I am excited, though, to kick off day 2. I have a guy who I've looked up to from afar for a long time. And then last year, he was gracious enough to come and hang out with us at the Corporate Entrepreneurship Forum. And we twisted his arm, and he's back again this year, Alex Osterwalder. If you don't know who Alex is at this point, I'm not sure that you're probably in the right place. You may be supposed to be on a different webinar right now. Look, everybody kind of knows Alex, is my sense. We use Alex's business model canvas in, I think, almost all of our entrepreneurship classes at Carnegie Mellon. It effectively serves as almost an outline where we kind of slot the curriculum into the different things we're working on. It's behind me because I'm working with my portfolio companies regularly on it. I suspect even beyond Alex's book and the business model canvas book, you've been exposed to a lot of his other canvases and some of the other stuff he's done through his consulting firm, Strategyzer. So Alex, like, I think people really know who you are, but I thought a fun way to start maybe would be like, what's something we don't know about you, or that people often don't know about you, maybe as a way to get this started today?
Awesome, Sean. Well, thanks for having me. A real pleasure to be with you again. And, one thing that people don't really know, at least those who don't follow me on Instagram, is I love these kind of backgrounds that go there. This is from a ski tour, actually walking up the mountain on the skis with skins under the skis. And that's where a lot of the ideas come from. So with my long-term co-author, former PhD supervisor, Yves Pigneur, we spend a lot of time in the Alps. He doesn't do the skiing, but we find good, nice resorts to do that. So that's one thing. The other thing maybe, that very few people know is I was aspiring to become a beach volleyball professional, and then I turned into a business thinker.
Wow, that's perfect. Yeah, so I think a lot of people know you're in Europe, but I didn't know that you were taking that kind of adventurous activities in Europe. I guess I got to get on Instagram and follow you there. That's awesome. So thanks for joining us again. As I said, you've been talking a lot about this concept of becoming an invincible company, and I thought that would be a good place to start. When I think about this audience, I think it's companies kind of on a journey towards that, whether they have that terminology or not. So I thought a place maybe to start with is just sort of the elevator pitch for being an invincible company.
Great way to start. Actually, I am just going to quickly use my new studio to describe the 3 characteristics of an invincible company. And the key is actually success corrupts future success, because if you believe you're invincible, you're going to die, right? So the secret is that you actually do not believe you're invincible. You constantly reinvent yourself. But so if I go kind of just to look at this, see mountain team kind of all the time, the first characteristic, and it sounds kind of trivial, but it's not really the case, right? That invincible companies constantly reinvent themselves while they're successful, right? And you have, a company like Amazon and a founder, former CEO like Jeff Bezos, who says Amazon's going to die. They're just reinventing themselves all the time to kind of push that timeline out. So that's characteristic number 1. Characteristic number 2 is something we've been working on for a long time, is competing on superior business models. So I think we're sometimes stuck in product thinking and technology innovation. I'm not saying that's wrong, new technologies, but look, sometimes you can't launch the technologies or bring them to market without the right business model. And turns out business models can protect you from competition. Guess why iPhone with the App Store, is up there, and why there are only 2 operating systems on the planet for mobile phones? Because they have superior business models. And the last one, really the most difficult one, is transcending industry boundaries. So I believe, if you still use, 5 forces and stuff like that, you're stuck in 1985. That's quite some time ago. Today, players, they create industries or arenas. Rita McGrath talks about arenas a lot. So transcending industry boundaries is really, really a key if you want to become an invincible company. And that's probably one of the hardest, because we think in terms of the industries we're in, at least kind of the old school strategic thinking is like that, but that's not going to work for very long.
Shots fired right off the bat at 5 forces here, which is good. I feel like I'm hearing some chatter in other parts of the Tepper Quad right now. So maybe for a minute, just elaborate on that point, five forces versus this kind of transcending industry boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I'm sorry, I didn't want to go so back to slides so quickly, but it's easy actually here. It's a nice one to talk about, the fact that it doesn't usually come from the core, right, of the system. So great example, I like to, and talking about firing shots, I like to make fun of companies or industries that can't transform. So think of it. You have the car industry, and they knew disruption is coming at one point, but it did take an outside player to do that. And while we see an electric vehicle company, well, it is, okay, luxury vehicles, most sold was in the FT just last week. They're among the most successful or the number one in selling luxury vehicles. But we see a car company and it's not, right? That's where we're getting to transcending industry boundaries. To succeed with electric vehicles, what's the first thing, one of the important things they did, is they took away the pains of customers, not by just features, but by modifying the business model. They said, we need an infrastructure. We need charging stations across the US, across the world. So wow, became an infrastructure company. But you know what? Actually, this existed before. Citroën, when they launched their car, they actually had gas stations, right? But today, you don't see Mercedes or whatever other company you want. They don't have charging stations. Okay, car company, electric vehicle company, maybe, but it's actually also a software company, data company, earning money from subscriptions. They started to launch a subscription to their cars. It's just unbelievable, to features. So and they say, okay, well, we're still in the car industry, aren't we? Well, maybe not, because software first, data first, and then come solar roofs. Is this a key part of their business today? Is this making most money? Absolutely not. But think of it. While they're playing the next wave of becoming an energy company, Volkswagen or Ford are still trying to figure out how to become an electric vehicle company. So we're not competing in the same league here. And again, you can be a fan of Tesla, you can hate it, but what you can't deny is this is a company that transcending industry boundaries and becoming a real kind of, player beyond. And last point, and I'll throw it back over to you again. The challenge that you have and why outside players today are so disruptive is because they're so much better funded than corporate innovation teams. And I'm not talking R&D, because R&D, technology R&D is not innovation. It can be part of it, but it's not, right? So what are startups incentivized to do? To succeed and grow. What are corporate innovation teams incentivized to do? Well, to survive, but it's not the same thing. So really, I think there's a challenge there. And the last one, maybe just to show from CB Insights as well, is that the acquisition strategy that we used to have in large companies, just not going to be that easy anymore, because A, some startups don't want to sell because they don't have to, and B, they're getting really, really expensive. So it's harder to use just one tool. I'm not saying acquisitions are wrong, but it's harder and harder to buy growth. You have to already be a successful innovator to buy that kind of growth.
It's got to be organic and inorganic, right? And I do think how you finance corporate innovation is a fascinating topic today, because I would argue we're both systematically and unintentionally, so sort of double from both sides, under investing in this area today. I do want to sort of just not lose this thread on Tesla, but just before I do that, just a note: the chat is open for this session as well as the Q&A. So I'm going to ask Alex some questions, but I also want to make sure we talk about what all of you guys want to talk about as well. So we'll keep an eye on that as well. But I do want to not lose this thread on Tesla for a minute, because, to your point on it took an outsider to come in. It wasn't like there hadn't been experimentation with electric vehicles before, and even success from traditional automakers, right? The GM EV1 was arguably on the path to becoming a very disruptive electric vehicle product offering itself inside of an incumbent. And so if you think about this becoming an invincible company, I'm curious, what do you think, obviously it's easy to play back to take and see how significant EV vehicles are today. But what do you think they should have done in the past, or how could GM have, handled that situation differently, given this framework you're laying out of becoming an invincible company?
Look, I do think, and again, I can't give them advice. I mean, I don't know what was going on at the time and how they were handling this. And, we can say it was just Tesla. It's not the reality. Actually, the regulator helped quite a bit to make the industry take off. But it was still, it was one competitor that benefited most and that went faster than everybody else. The first thing I would, put on the table that we sometimes forget is that Tesla has testing in their DNA, testing what could work. Now, some people don't know this, right? We know that with the Model 3, they asked people to make down payments before they even had the car finished, before they had the factories. Right. So hundreds of thousands of people, signed up, and then famously Elon Musk went to go get the money to actually finish the damn thing. But right. So what people don't know is before Martin Eberhard and the founding team at Tesla, this was pre-Elon, when Elon Musk was an investor, they actually, started to make prototypes with the Lotus Elise that they put in front of people. And then they didn't just ask, would you like this? They actually made these, what we today call call to action experiments. They said, you have the opportunity to make a down payment of $100,000 if you want to reserve a car. And it took them actually quite some time to deliver them. So that's also in their DNA of always being late on everything, but they eventually deliver. So they tested, consumption, customer kind of, willingness to pay before they built anything. So I think this is pretty spectacular to watch. And then the other thing, and, I have a Tesla myself. Not necessarily a fan of how the company's managed from what I see. I think it's pretty violent kind of style, but you just can't, it's really an entrepreneurial mindset where you innovate and you get to the next level, is relentless, innovation and execution. And I don't think the same hunger sometimes exists in car companies. Now, I can't, take that particular case of what existed before and on the side, but what is definitely clear, it was more an execution mindset, not an innovation and testing mindset, which is clearly the case at Tesla. And they were always targeting, they always said, we want not to create, another golf cart, an ugly, electric vehicle for people who, just in quotes, don't get me wrong on this one, just in quotes, bought it because it was green, but they actually made a car, for people who wanted a good-looking car that's fast. Right. Think of it. Like, that's the last thing you would think back in the day, because, electric vehicles looked like golf carts of the day. And the thing to keep in mind is also, again, customer focus. When they were starting to build the Model S also, they put German cars in the courtyard, and the designers and the engineers could drive home with a different Mercedes or BMW every evening, because that was their yardstick. Their yardstick for mass market car was not, oh, we're going to sell a green car. So they really had a different kind of focus, and then I would say an underexplored market of people where it wasn't necessarily green or electric vehicle first, just pretty cool and fast car. Kind of interesting, right? Because nobody was thinking like that at the time.
Yeah, no. And, I would say we did a little bit of looking into the EV1 when we were sort of building out our research for the book, Science of Growth. I mean, the consumers were equally passionate about those cars. I mean, they famously, literally did protests around trying to get them to reclaim the cars, because the GM had just leased all the vehicles to them. So when they came to pick them up, there were like protests and things like that. But I think part of it is exactly what you're getting to here too, on knowing what industry you're in. Like if you think you're an automotive company with the very classic definition of that, you feel differently than, if you're sort of have this broader perspective. We've got a question from Steve on Tesla, and then I think let's sort of move back through some of the other ones as well. So Steve's question to you is, how much of Tesla's success is the result of one man's vision, that being Elon, similar to Steve Jobs at Apple? And his sort of the punchline as it ties back to your invincible company is that key to becoming an invincible company, this entrepreneurial vision?
So, well, number one, Elon did not found, like he was not the original founder of Tesla. So let's just get that one right. I mean, he did scale it, right? So there's definitely a merit to that. He did not start it. So, there's a whole kind of backstory on this, and you can believe whatever you want.
I think he was a founding investor is technically the title they use to describe it.
There are court cases over who can call himself or herself founder. So let's not get into that. But look, was there at the beginning and definitely has the merit of scaling. So I'm not a fan, I'll be honest. I don't know Elon Musk, but I'm not a fan of his style per se. But you got to admire what he did, like not just for Tesla, but for other, companies that he launched. And that is just very impressive. Again, I'm not a fan of his style, of his management style, of how he treats people. But it's absolutely undeniable that part of the success of Tesla has to do with Elon Musk. But again, I'd frame it a little bit differently. So there are a couple of things that he has that helped, just like everybody, talks about Steve Jobs as if he was the perfect human being. He was absolutely great, in terms of innovator. But working with Steve Jobs was not always a pleasure, right? So some good things, maybe some bad things, maybe you could actually have the good things without the bad things. So if you take Elon Musk and you look at the good things, it's what you see in entrepreneurs a lot. It is, yes, a vision. And Jeff Bezos talks about that, being stubborn on the vision, but being extremely flexible on the way to get there, in how you turn it into a reality. And not giving up, being kind of relentless and getting up again and again and again. Because I can tell you, this was not, if you just look at also the scaling challenges they had with the supply chain, that was not easy. But you have a hunger there. And what Elon Musk probably also did is he brought people on board who had the same kind of hunger. He also burnt out a lot of people. And I know people who worked with him. Like he was relentless in what he was asking from people. But it's that startup mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset that you might not find in the same way inside corporations. I think it exists, and I think there's a different version of entrepreneurship. I think corporate entrepreneurship might be a less aggressive, different version that can lead to the same kind of success. So I think the startup world is a little bit harsher than the corporate innovation world. The challenges are similar, but it's interesting to see that. What you definitely won't get in corporations is innovation without the entrepreneurial mindset. It just doesn't happen. I think no company has a challenge of people. The ideas are there and the people are there. The talent is there. The problem is the system that doesn't unleash that entrepreneurial talent. If you are, at BMW or whatever, Volkswagen or GM or Ford, you have the entrepreneurial talent. The thing that's missing is the ecosystem to unleash that talent. So when people ask, but Alex, people are the most important. Well, yes, but it's the wrong framing, because people without the infrastructure, without the ecosystem, without the organizational design go nowhere. So today, I think most corporations, they have the talent, they have the ideas, but they're not unleashing that talent because they didn't put up the structure. So it's not people or structure, it's and.
Yeah, that's super well said. I will say, I think a lot of them are also trying to figure out the right structure. Like I think they're trying to learn. And one of the kind of figuring out the right structures, this kind of ties to both the question we got in the chat and one of the questions I had previewed for you, is from Dennis, who I think you actually know. Dennis is at Bosch. I believe you guys may have done some stuff together. But Dennis asked, how can companies create this complete innovation portfolio? And specifically, what are the different capability and steering needs for these portfolio elements? Or, and I think that's one of the sort of portfolio map is one of the tools you've been talking a lot about recently, which I think ties into some of what you're talking about on processes as well, Alex.
Look, since we're bringing up Bosch, let me actually show you the illustration of Bosch just with a very quick video. Actually, it'll be participatory. It'll get people. Is that okay, Sean, if I show
Of course.
the video?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. This gentleman here, Uwe Kirchner, was tasked with building the Bosch accelerator program. And look, there are a couple of things they did right. There's still a couple of things they need to figure out. But let's look at how they built this, at least part of the innovation ecosystem. And we'll listen to Uwe ask us a question. So let's listen to Uwe for a sec.
Hi there, my name is Uwe Kirschner. I'm from Bosch Management Consulting. I'm partner for Business Model Innovation. And it's a pleasure to be the Invincible Company of the Month. What you see here is Bosch's research center in Renningen near Stuttgart. It represents Bosch's history, present, and certainly also the future. Traditionally, our organization has been very successful in the development of new technologies and new products. And certainly, this will also remain so in the future. In the year 2015, something very important happened. Our board of management decided to set up a competence center for business model innovation. The challenge was clear. We had to test many innovation ideas in a fast and capital efficient way. We wanted to find the very few innovation projects which have the potential to scale. Now the question to you, in order to reach that number of 19 innovation projects successfully exiting our Bosch accelerator program, how many projects entered the validation phase? 19 innovation projects, 43, 108, 214, or even 926. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so let's see in the chat window. So please participate. What do you think? What do you think? How many projects did they invest in? German conservative company to create 19 winners. Did they invest in A, B, C, D, or E? It's an interesting, because we'll see what the answer is. And usually, if you compare it to what you really see in most companies, maybe not as good. Okay, so let's listen to Uwe. And sorry for the sound first. Still playing a little bit with my new studio. So here's not just the answer, but how they've done it. I think the how they've done it is incredibly important. So let's listen to Uwe and how they have actually done it.
Yes, you're right. 214 innovation projects entered our validation engine, our Bosch accelerator program. You've probably read the book, right? Let me give you some additional information around these 214 innovation projects which entered our Bosch accelerator program. Phase 1 has an average duration of 3 months, including prep time. The average budget is 120,000 euros per team, and this already includes the personnel costs. After a very short period of time, and as I said, 3 months, we are able to successfully terminate 65% of all innovation projects. The remaining projects, in numbers 74, continued their journey in phase 2 of our program. The average team has a budget of 300,000 euros. And again, this includes, on one hand side, the personnel costs, but also the costs for the development and iteration of the MVP. And again, at the end of phase 2, a high number of innovation projects can be successfully terminated. We believe it's very important to ask the teams themselves whether they believe they're a go or no-go at the end of phase 1 and also at the end of phase 2 of the program, because this really brings responsibility to teams, and this also certainly drives cultural change in an organization. The go criteria, which we derive out of most recent methods and tools, are the foundation for a proper decision whether a team should stop or continue their journey. The success rate of the Bosch accelerator program is around 10%, meaning that only 10% of the innovation projects are successfully exiting our Bosch accelerator program. Now, you might argue that's a low number. I would disagree, because in explorative and adjacent innovations, you need to accept that the success rate is reasonably low. The purpose of the Bosch accelerator program is to find those very few innovation projects which really have the potential to scale. Successful organizations, we do both.
Okay, but then he goes on a bit, but what I would really emphasize here is that this is the key part, that the teams got some money. It doesn't have to be 120,000 euro or $120,000, but then they quickly successfully retired. That's the key thing I want everybody to hear, because if you can't kill projects, you're condemning teams to succeed and they're going to play it safe. If it's okay to fail and come back and start the next time, you're going to get bold innovation. So by actually killing projects, they boost innovation because teams know they can come back next time, and it's okay. It's normal. Sometimes they're too early. Sometimes it's not going to work. There's nothing there. And that's how they created this kind of funnel. So I think the key in understanding is, how do you build this ecosystem where you create this kind of funnel? Because when CEOs and leaders ask me, Alex, we're just not getting these breakthrough innovations, I ask them, well, how many projects do you kill? Because if you're investing in 2 projects and they both need to succeed, 2 things could happen. One is they're going to play it safe. The other one is they're going to play it big, but then you have the absolute risk that you're investing in something that nobody wants, right? So big investments at the early stage is wrong. As you've seen with Bosch, you make small investments first and you make bigger investments at the end. It's the typical kind of approach we have in venture capital. It's just that we haven't brought that into corporations. And I'm not talking about corporate venture capital, right? Here we're talking internal teams. The problem is, oh, we do this, corporate venture capital. That's another animal. And they actually should live in parallel. Corporate venture capital, but the same way of investing in your internal innovation teams. And sometimes you even mix them. And sometimes based on that, you make the acquisitions. That's the kind of ecosystem that you need to build.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that too, right? People often react when they hear these stories, when I talk to them at least, about that 10% number, where they think about 10% as the batting average. But keep in mind, if you're effectively tripling the dollars each time you move through one of those stages, then you're putting way more than 10% of your dollars against the successful ideas, right? Because you're not peanut butter spreading that equally across those hundreds of ideas. You're putting more of your money into the winners, which, as you say, like, and I know this firsthand because I managed a number of VC portfolios, like, that's how you deliver outsized returns on things that have a power law like return curve, right? And so I think let's not miss that like, hey, it's not 10% of the dollars that are successful, it's 10% of the starting ideas that are successful, which is a slightly different thing.
And the key is, these teams actually should not be startups in chains. So when you invest in them at the beginning, you need to make sure that they have access to brand, that they have access to the customers. So it's one thing you have as a company is customers. Well, tragically, sometimes the key account managers say, no, I don't want you innovation team to talk to my customers. They're not going to close the deal that I need to close now to get my bonus. So what we have often is, the worst of the corporate world with the hard part of the startup world, which is to try to build a business. But now, if you actually enable those teams, innovation has power, and they have access to what corporations have, brand, intellectual property, customers, they become unstoppable. And if you look at Amazon, if you look at Ping An, Amazon is maybe a bad example because they started with the DNA of innovators. Take a company like, one I like is, or Bosch, we could take Ping An in China, a transformation where a company actually had to go from regular company and transform into an innovation machine. That's why copying Amazon is maybe a bit of a lost cause, because they started as an innovation machine. Looking at examples like Bosch, like Ping An, where they transformed to become an innovation machine is much more realistic.
Yeah, so that actually leads to a question Sue Cohen asked in the chat, and I'm just going to double click on the second half of it because it's a rather long question. I think the heart of it is the second part. So do you have an example or two of a new and highly effective funding model for these non-core innovations in these established organizations? So I guess the question is like, you walk through the Bosch example, focus more on what's happening with the ideas. What about the funding side of things? Do you have examples there that you would point to?
So if I go back to Bosch, it actually includes, so it's the funding logic, right? So the idea that you give, and you mentioned it before, right? You give small amounts of money to a large number of teams at the beginning down here. That's how you fund. And I actually like to say, well, here, the reason why this is 120,000 euro, the equivalent of maybe, $140,000, is because they include the time of the teams. To start innovation, you don't need money. You actually need to give teams time. What we see working with these world-class companies is they believe their teams can do it on 20% time. That's not how it works. Giving teams time is the starting model. And that costs money, of course. So that's why we get to 120,000 here. That's not out of the pocket funding. In a startup, like if seed funding, you need that because people have to survive. They need to put food on the table and buy maybe some technology. But here, it's about small amounts of money or time to get everybody started. I believe personally, we need to tear down the barriers. Everybody needs to have the chance to start. But after 3 months, everybody needs to go through this kind of, are we going to kill this idea? Not based on traditional stage gate, but based on the evidence they bring to the table or not. Evidence that the customer actually has that pain. Evidence that the customer has a budget. Not evidence that the idea is going to work. It's a small piece. And you can actually Google Innovation Project Scorecard, where we show how you can score the evidence of a team. And then if the team brings that evidence to the table, that's when they get to the next stage and they can ask for more money. Why do they need more money? Because maybe they need to enlarge the team, not to build a thing, not to execute, but maybe because now the experiments become more expensive. Maybe now we're making a technological prototype. And there's a big myth, by the way, talking about funding. You don't need to build anything to start testing your idea. That's key. You don't need to build anything. It's a wonderful example. In the insurance industry, a company that wanted to make new type of insurance for corn and cattle farmers, they brought a brochure to an event, and then they had a number and an email on it. And if people would contact them, they learned if these farmers were interested. That didn't require building anything other than the brochure, right? So you don't need to build to test. So you don't need a lot of money, no funding, very little funding at the beginning, no barrier to entry. And then you give them funding when they get to the next stage, because they might have to build at one point a technological prototype. And then, of course, here, when we get towards scaling, that's when you invest. So it's really the portfolio approach, which sometimes people like to call metered funding, small amounts of money, large amount of teams. And then immediately after maximum 3 months, you reduce the teams to maybe 25% to 30% of the teams. That's the key. Because otherwise your funding is going to explode and ideas that should never be pursued are going to be pursued, right? That's the kind of stuff that we're not seeing yet at scale. That's why I love the Bosch example. Do they have a lot to figure out? For sure. But that's pretty substantial, building these kind of portfolios. If you take Amazon, it's not even portfolio management anymore. It's all the time, everywhere. It's the same kind of logic, right?
Yep. And we've got a couple of friends. I see Estella from Bosch is on as well, answering questions for us in the chat. So Estella, thank you on behalf of Alex and I. Alex, I do want to just stay on this portfolio thing for just 1 minute more, and specifically the bottom half of the two boxes.
Yeah.
So one of my hypotheses, again, kind of coming at this as a serial, traditional entrepreneur, not corporate entrepreneur, and then VC, is that the question, how big could an idea be if successful, is actually much easier to answer than how likely will this idea to be successful at the earliest stages. And so when I think about, I've certainly found that true in traditional venture, and in interaction with corporates, I'm beginning to believe the same thing's true there. So when I think about your, bottom half of the two-part, the sort of explore and then exploit part, it feels like different companies need different minimums, but on that y-axis, there's probably a number that every company needs, that like, if you can't clear this hurdle, it's not worth it. And then as you move from stage to stage, that needs to go up. How should companies think about that from the work that you're doing around their portfolio work?
So I would actually expand it a little bit beyond just, in quotes, the money, right? Now, at the end of the day, to add to this is, in innovation today, there are no companies, frankly, almost no more companies that don't have innovation activity. So they all say, yeah, we do this, we do this. But then you start to look at the results. Okay, how much new revenue or sustainability impact, if that's, it doesn't have to be just the revenue goal. Well, how much did you achieve? What's the value you created? Because if there's not very much value, it's innovation theater, right? It's innovation for the show. So that first, right? But we believe actually that at the beginning, you need to play with the numbers right away. And, that's traditionally what we do. We present these PowerPoints with beautiful spreadsheets. That's actually okay. As long as we don't believe those numbers, we just say, okay, if this idea worked, how big would it be? What's the maximum it could be? And then you start to test and iterate. And actually, the idea might substantially, change. But it's not just the numbers. I believe what's missing often is the entire portfolio guidance. And part of that is the size of the opportunity. But the other part is, well, what's in and what's out? Do we focus on sustainability, or do we focus on a specific arena? So if you take Ping An, for example, they clearly said, we're going to play in 5 different arenas. And they didn't call them industries, because they were saying, okay, health sector, auto, home, mobility, that kind of stuff. And then what did that lead to? Ping An Good Doctor, where you have today the biggest health platform on the planet, Ping An Good Doctor, 300 million users, because they said traditional banking and insurance conglomerate building the biggest health platform. For Swiss, that's troubling, because we have, 2 big pharma companies, Roche and Novartis, and they can't figure it out. But so the portfolio guidance was clear. But there was also something else that was clear. They said, you do not need to make money like an insurance or a bank. You can become like an internet company. So that's why they were able to launch Ping An Good Doctor, because ultimately it would lead to revenue, but they didn't know exactly how and when. So upfront, it was about building new platforms in the arenas they wanted to be in, because they knew they would be able to monetize that just like a technology company. So, the numbers to a certain extent was not that clear there. But what was clear is they said, we want to become a #1 player in the health sector, period, right? So there was some guidance there that allowed the teams to start exploring. The part that was also important is that they said, don't focus on exactly how you're going to make money. We're going to be an internet company. We are actually going to work on users first, because we know that those kind of platforms, ultimately, you'll be able to monetize, in particular when you already have one of the biggest insurance companies. So I think that portfolio guidance is key. And the portfolio guidance is the same for your core business and for which we call exploit, and for explore. So it's the same strategy, which we call portfolio guidance, that informs both portfolios. Because innovation should not be disconnected from your strategy. And increasingly, innovation is becoming strategy, right? So numbers, yes, but numbers is not enough of guidance. But back to your initial question, it's true that sometimes we have all these little ideas, and that's why we don't get to the big results. But I think also the scaling up aspect is preventing the big ideas to really becoming big growth engines.
Yeah, it's sort of either path. If you don't check those, is a path to sort of achieving failure, as our friends would say, right? Like you do these things and then it doesn't work out. So let's just there's been a couple of questions around this sort of personality of entrepreneurs inside a company, and what you're looking for in the talent. One of our attendees, Steve, who's been in human resources for a long time, referenced the predictive index tool to assess people, and talked about Mavericks, and like, is that the type of personality you're looking for here? But just when you think about people who are going to do this work inside a traditional company, what should people be looking for? What are the attributes they should look for on their teams?
Let me be a bit provocative and say, don't even try. Don't even try. Because you're starting from this idea that you can pick the winner. If I just find the right person and the right idea, it's going to work, right? So, and I'll deliberately be a bit black and white. I believe if you create the ecosystem, where you invest in all ideas and all teams. You don't select, you don't filter it out, but you let everybody start. No, so not everybody has to be an entrepreneur, but everybody has the opportunity to become an entrepreneur. The winning teams and the winning ideas will emerge. It's like evolution. So I'm not a big believer in picking the people who are going to, it's like, it's like a planned economy. It didn't really work out that way. So I believe in creating that ecosystem so winning teams and winning ideas can emerge. Now, do those people who will, produce the winning ideas, do they have certain characteristics in common? Absolutely. But it's so hard, because you can have people who absolutely fit that profile and they're still going to fail. So I have a little bit of a hard time, but the reason I'm making this black and white, because of course it's more gray, in the sense that you do want to have a couple of people who do this again and again and again, because you get better at it over time. It's like yourself, right? As an entrepreneur who's done it more than once. The mistakes you made at the beginning, I'm sure you're not going to make them again, right? I'm still making mistakes, but the mistakes I made, and some of them cost me a lot of money, I'm not going to make those again, because you get better at innovation, you get better at entrepreneurship. So I'm a little bit skeptical. I think there is something that we can find, but it's probably a mix. Venture capitalists, with all the experience they have and with all the scorecards we come up with, we still can't pick the winners, right? And that's the profession of a venture capitalist. So that's why we have portfolios. So I think there's some things we can see, but you can't pick winning ideas and you can't pick winning teams. But you can maybe have a little bit of a radar to narrow that big funnel down smaller.
Yeah, that's awesome. We are flying through time here, Alex. So I'm going to be greedy and I'm going to ask the last question because I'm really curious about this. So you're probably, I think Thinkers 50 has you at number 4, but you're arguably, 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, top 5 deepest thinkers on transformative innovation today. And so I'm curious, what are the areas that you're excited about now? What are the things you're beginning to think about? What's maybe the next book or the next topic area for you?
Well, I don't know about a next book, because it's like painful. It's really nice when it's done, but we try to make these visual books. They're really, really painful. It takes a lot of time, energy, and money. But I do think, and we already scratched the surface a little bit, and I think there was a question somewhere in the Invincible company, is business models where impact and profits are not at the expense of each other, but where they're in harmony, right? And it's not just at the business model level, it's actually also at the portfolio level. So I'll give you 2 examples that I think are really awesome. I just came back from Denmark speaking at a conference, a President's Summit, and there's a company there called Ørsted. Ørsted used to be the biggest state oil and gas company in Denmark. And they were the first company to fully transform from oil and gas to renewable energy, fully. They didn't just talk about it, because a lot of the big companies talk about it, they don't do it. They went through that, so they really transformed. I, talked to the government of Kuwait, and so I'd be excited if they put their resources into actually making that happen, because I do think it's possible. And Unilever, and Paul Polman used to be CEO when he started and had that vision of sustainable living, and he said, profits can be an outcome of focusing on sustainability. They can be in harmony, and they restructured their entire portfolio with that kind of portfolio direction of sustainable living. That's the kind of stuff I'm excited about. And I think it's going to be hard without business model innovation. Technology will help us part of the way, but technology without the right business model sometimes gets stuck, right? So we need business model innovation to unlock some of these technologies. Some of them are too expensive, so you can't kind of sell the technology. So you need to come up with something else. That's the stuff I'm excited about.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm going to ask, so we've been having Leah Silverman do some graphical facilitation through the session. So we're going to have Leah come on and share her screen. But while she's doing that, Alex, I just want to thank you again for making yourself available this morning. It's really awesome to get to have you join us for these things. So
it's an honor and pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.